Blog Talk Radio.
Bichamo Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit Neye Ojirada Medinde Ojirafo Kwesi Ranen Bata Akan Akwamai Namaruka Etifi Wu Ojirafo Odwiraman Mu. Greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning African Black people. Today is Ojira Day, Purification Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ranen Bata Akan. Ojirafo of the Akwamum Nation in North America within Odwiraman, the Purified Nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast. Once again, we have opened up the chat room. We placed the link to our Etche Sign page in the chat room for information we'll be going over with regard to that. For individuals who are new to the broadcast, we have 3 broadcasts on a weekly basis. On Joda, Monday nights, we have Akanfo Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion, where we deal specifically with the Akan expression of Nanasom. Number 1, because we're Akan. Number 2, because of the misinformation that is propagated regarding Akan cosmology, divinity, the nature of the Abosom, deities, the nature of the Nananom Nsamanfo, spiritually cultivated ancestors and ancestors in relationship to us, and a number of different things. So we deal with that on Joda on Monday night. On Awukuda, Akwada Wednesday night, we have Egua Marketplace. And on the Egua Marketplace show, we typically have businesses, organizations, and institutions, individuals who are serving our community in a positive capacity will maintain their ancestral religious values in the process. So we've had a number of individuals come on to the show to share with us their business, organization, institution, how they began their process, how they are serving the community, and how their ancestral religious values inform their service to the community. We're going to place a link in the chat room for the OCOM Economic Development Model page, and that is part of the process for the Egua Marketplace show. We have published a document, OCOM Economic Development Model. It is an economic development model rooted in our ancestral religious values. It is therefore a holistic approach to economic development. You can download that article, free download, of course, from the OCOM Economic Development Model page. You can also download the 4-part series that we did and related broadcasts on the OCOM Economic Development Model. But part of our process on the Egua Marketplace show is that we implement that OCOM Economic Development Model process, operation. Part of that process is to starve the beast and feed the prize. That means on a weekly basis, you make a determination about what funds you would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and you starve the beast. You reallocate those funds or take those funds away from the white business and reallocate them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We are targeting one Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks for optimal capital infusion. And you will see the list of various businesses, organizations, and institutions we have been supporting on the OCOM Economic Development Model page. That's a growing list. And we're going to have many more businesses, organizations, and institutions to be added to that list on a regular basis. So keep checking that page, and we'll introduce that business of the week tomorrow so we can continue that process. Yet I'll say to everyone who has participated in that process, supporting these businesses, organizations, and institutions. When you have a business where you starve the beast and you feed the pride, you make a decision that you're not going to waste that $10 you would have wasted in the course of 1 week at CVS or Chipotle or wherever you may have wasted that money, and spend that $10 at the business, organization, or institution of the week, supporting them, making a donation, and so forth, then that is an infusion of $10 of capital. When 1,000 of our people engage that process during the same week, because we're on the same page, that's a $10,000 infusion of capital into a black business in the course of 1 week. Not dependent upon loans from a white financial institution, not dependent on any of that nonsense. Coming directly from the community, a $10,000 infusion of capital, which allows them to hire black people within the business immediate so that they can serve us at a greater capacity. They can expand their services. They can expand their product line so that they can meet the needs of our people so that we will not feel obligated to go to some non-black business to receive products and services. We put the money in the businesses, our businesses, then they can expand their services immediately, overnight, and also employ our people immediately, overnight, within the course of the same week. So it's a win-win situation. Of course, if we don't engage that process, by default, we leave that $10,000 in the hands of our enemies, the whites and their offspring, and therefore, by default, we are financing our own oppression. So we must engage that OCOM economic development model operation and that strategy to starve the beast and feed the prophet. So that's what we deal with on Obukuda Koda Wednesday night. And tonight is Ben Nada, Abenada. Tuesday night we have Ojira. Ojira means purification. It also means a celebration of purification in the Akan language. It also means purification in the language of ancient Tanat and Kemet, Nubia and Egypt, our ancestral culture. Ojira means purification, as we show in the Medutu and the hieroglyph. It also means a celebration of purification. The same term with the same function that we have carried on for thousands of years. So when we talk about purification, we're talking about purification operationalizes Nanason. Purification operationalizes Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion. Ancestral religion is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, these are the expansive and contracted poles of ancestral religion. And we say, Ojira, purification operationalizes Nanason. Purification operationalizes ancestral religion. So this is what we deal with on Benada, Abenada, Tuesday night, Ojira. So the broadcast for tonight, we titled AHONIM Ne AARU, Locative Identity and the Ancestral Religious Community. Now, we have defined in one of our previous broadcasts the nature of the Ari community or the AARU, the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Ancestral Religious Into or Community. AARU, we defined properly and showed that AARU from the root Ari, meaning to make, to work, to do, to see, to understand, to perceive, and so forth. This acronym AARU, AARU, also means to make forms, the divine forms of divinities and so forth in ancient Kemet, a number of different definitions, all related. The acronym Ancestral or Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Ancestral Religious Community, we properly defined. Some people talk about the so-called conscious community, have given it a negative connotation, but even when it had a positive connotation, simply meaning conscious or aware, we have a specific nuanced definition of who we are, talking about the ancestral religious community, the AARU, for this Afurakani, Afuraitkait people on the continent as well as in the Western Hemisphere. We engage the process of ritually incorporating divine law and ritually restoring divine balance so that we can align every thought, every intention, and every action with divine order every moment of every day. And when we make mistakes, We have ancestral religion to incorporate law ritually and restore balance ritually, to realign ourselves with order, and even beyond making mistakes, just to learn, to know, to understand, to innovate. We engage that ritual incorporation of divine law and ritual restoration of divine balance so that we can create and build and defend. So this is what the ARU, the Ancestral Religious Community, is. So we're talking about AHONIM ne ARU. The term AHONIM in the Akan tradition, Ahun means self, Nim means to know. Nim die means things, ye, adie, that are known or knowledge. The Nim means to know. Ahun means self. So Ahonim means self, Ahun, Nim, knowledge. Self-knowledge, self-consciousness, self-conscience. We're not talking about self-conscious in a negative sense or embarrassment of that kind of nonsense, but having direct understanding, knowledge of who we are, our self-understanding, self-knowledge, self-consciousness, self-awareness, self-conscious. That's AHONIM. And then ARU, of course, is the Ancestral Religious Community. Locative Identity and the Ancestral Religious Community. So when we're talking about locative identity within the community of Odwiraman, the Purified Nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African people in the Western Hemisphere, Black people in the Western Hemisphere, all Black people in the Western Hemisphere have our roots in Afuraka, Afuraitkait, Africa without exception. This nonsense about African Americans and African, all of that idiocy comes from the whites and their offspring and our people who are steeped in self. Of course, you also have some Negroes who are agents of the whites and offspring spreading this misinformation. This misinformation campaign is nothing new. The whites and their offspring since enslavement sought to disconnect us and try to dispossess us of our knowledge, our AHONIM, our self-knowledge, self-consciousness of who we are as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, so that they can brutalize us, control us, enslave us, control the minds of our people. So they began to promote this idea that we are not Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, we're just niggas in America, we're just cattle, we're just slaves. As we freed ourselves from enslavement, they recognized the reality that it was through our AHONIM, self-consciousness, self-knowledge, self-conscience of our identity as children of Ra and Ra'et, children of the Abosom, children of the Orisha, the Vodou, the Ntorotu that empowered us, motivated, and guided us to wage war against the whites and their offspring, effectively massacre them, cut them down, and free ourselves from enslavement. So they knew that removing the culture, which is animated by the ancestral religion, was the only way that they could see possibly that they could control the minds of our people. So they began to indoctrinate our people near the end of enslavement with Christianity. And of course, when some of our people didn't go along fully with Christianity, they brought forward a remixed version of Christianity, which is Islam, and also Judaism, Hebrewism, Hinduism, later on different iterations of Hinduism, pseudo-esotericism. Whenever our people didn't go for one of these little foolish doctrines, they would give us something else. The vast majority who were brainwashed went for Christianity. A small percentage didn't go for that, so they gave people Islam, Moorishism, all of that foolishness. Some of our people didn't go for that, Hebrewism, some didn't go for that, variations of Hinduism, going back to the late 1800s, the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago and so forth, 1893 and so forth, people being introduced to meditation and transcendental meditation and quote-unquote white versions of quote-unquote yoga and so forth. All of this nonsense, some of our people are attracted to that, some of our people being attracted to pseudo-esotericism, some of our people foolishly embracing masonry and all of this idiocy, all controlled by the whites and their offspring, all under the design to brainwash our people, to make our people hate themselves, reject themselves, hate our actual identity as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, and therefore embrace a false identity. trying to make our people believe that we're all Native Americans, all other nonsense. So black people began to be proud and say, well, if they have some blood mixture, their hair is a little bit straighter, their skin is a little bit more bleached out, they want to claim to be Cherokee and all this other nonsense, and the vast majority of them have these features because the whites in their offspring raped their blood, the blood circle. And the whites in their offspring, not only the Western Eurasian, but also the Eastern Eurasian. They're still the whites in their offspring. Those same Eastern Eurasians who invaded this hemisphere and mislabeled themselves Native American. So our people incorporating this foolish idea, this foolish lack of understanding of our identity, this self-hatred, trying to identify with these white Asians, trying to call ourselves Native American and all this other nonsense, calling ourselves Black Indians and all this other nonsense. So that is a plan, an agenda put forward by the whites and their offspring over 100 years ago. And some of our people are latching on to that now, powered by the agents within the community. All of these individuals who have founded these Moorish organizations and founded these Hebrew organizations and founded these esoteric organizations are agents of the whites and their offspring without exception. And they have continued to try to push this information, and with the popularity of the internet and so forth, they've sought to push this information even further. But of course, at the same time, what's taking place is something that never took place in over 100 years. We have accurate information that totally destroys this foolishness, destroys these misidentities being forced upon our people. We actually know the origin of the term Africa, Afuraka, Afuraitkait. We're connected to Ra and Ra'et through direct experience. We know exactly who they are, not because we read about them, because they possess our people and communicate directly with our people, not only on the continent, but here, children and adults. So we have direct experience with Ra and Ra'et. We know exactly who we are. And we put this information forward to destroy these foolish doctrines such as Moorishism, Hebrewism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, pseudo-esotericism, and everything else. Pseudo-mysticism and everything else. We're talking about all black people in the Western Hemisphere have our roots in Afuraka, Afuraitkait without exception. As we migrated or were forced to migrate away from Afuraka, Afuraitkait, we carried our ancestral religion and culture with us in our blood circle. As we interface with the region of Asaase Afua, the earth mother upon which we dwell, we develop a locative identity, rooted in our Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit African identity, yet expressed in a unique fashion. This unique expression includes ancestral religious practice, initiation, and more. We are not dependent upon anyone outside of our direct ancestral blood circles to legitimize our ancestral religious practices. Indeed, it is cosmologically impossible. Traveling to, studying within, or repatriating to Afuraka, Afuraitkait, or Africa does not confer ancestral knowledge upon the individual. Our ancestral religion and culture is transmitted and received transcarnationally, through successive incarnation, transcarnationally, through our ancestral blood circle. Our unique expression of ancestral religion rooted in our locative identity is primary with regard to our capacity to establish and maintain spiritual and communal balance within Odwiraman, the Purified Nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, in the Western Hemisphere. So we've talked about previously in our broadcast and the work, this notion of indigenization. We're going to compare that to locative identity. We've talked about, for example, in our broadcast, Debra Nesu, reincarnation and race, who and what to accept, and who to accept and who not to accept, understanding our identity. And we dealt with indigenization in that broadcast, another broadcast, but we want to deal tonight with locative identity. So first, briefly, to summarize this notion of indigenization, number one, only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people can become indigenized anywhere in the world. We don't listen to false definitions of indigenization by the whites and their offspring. They do not define reality. We define reality. We define the rules, and we lay those rules out. We don't imitate our enemies who are inferior to us. We have real information. We set the standard. You are not indigenous to a region simply because you migrate to a region and you're the first person there. It doesn't matter if you're the first person there for 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, or thousands of years. Just migrating to a region and being the first group in the area does not make you indigenous to the area. Now, the whites and offspring will say, well, that's the definition of being indigenous. But it is not. So let's give the proper definition as we've laid out cosmologically in previous broadcasts in a summary fashion. If you migrate somewhere and you settle on a parcel of land, you are simply a settler. You're simply a visitor to that region. If one or more in your group connect with the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, the Ntorutu of the region, become possessed by the Abosom, the divinities of the local river, mountainous area, region, that of the landmass, this region of the Earth Mother, the specific expressions of divinities in this region with their own unique energetic emanations and energy complexes, you become possessed by, or one or more of your people in your group become possessed by the divinities as they operate and animate this region, this new region you have migrated to. And those Abosom get into the body of the person and transform the cells of the person, transform the energy of the person. Energy is animating the person's body, affects the cell, affects the energy constitution of the cells. Now their cells are resonating at the frequency of the divinity who has taken up residence inside their body during possession. Transformation. Once the possession is over, the person's cells are transformed. That includes the sperm and ovum cells. So when they copulate with their mate and give birth to children, the sperm cell, ovum cell fuses, embryo, that zygote that develops into an embryo, its physical body is resonating at the frequency of the Abosom of the region who possess one or more of the parents. Now that child and those children are the firstborn indigenous to the land. They're the firstborn who are tied to the land. The firstborn who are connected to the divinities who animate the land. They are literally shrines for those divinities, born as shrines for those divinities. So they're the firstborn. And then they grow up, become adults, copulate with other people in the society, give birth to children, and within 1 to 2 generations, you have a population of people who are the firstborn and born indigenous to the land. That's the indigenization process. Only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people can become indigenized anywhere in the world because only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people, as children of Afura and Afuraitkait, can become possessed by any deity and interface with any deity, and therefore become transformed physiologically and spiritually by the energy of these different deities. So because we have the capacity to do that, and none of the whites in their offspring can, white Europeans, white Asians, Western Eurasians, Europeans, Eastern Eurasians, Asians and so forth, as well as pseudo-Native Americans have no capacity to become possessed by nor communicate with any force in nature. Therefore, they cannot be transformed physically because no deity will take up residence in their bodies, will not transform their cells, and therefore they can never give birth to children whose bodies resonate at the frequency of the deities that govern the land. So they can never become indigenous. They are always settlers, invaders. They are never bound to any landmass because they are not natural on Earth. It's like the cancerous cells in your body are not naturally occurring. It's a result of degeneration, and they never have a home. They are always slated for destruction. And when the immune system cells and lymphatic system cells reach them, they are destroyed. They never have a permanent place of residence in any natural sense. And the same is true of the cancerous cells within the body of black humanity, the whites and their offspring. That includes white Europeans, white Americans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white Latinos, Latinas, white Hispanics, white Asians, white pseudo-Native Americans. Cancerous cells within the body of black humanity without exception until they become extinct, until we make them extinct. So they have no capacity to become indigenous. So there's a difference between indigenization and an identity rooted in indigenization and a locative identity. We want to talk about we talked about the indigenization process before. We want to talk about locative identity tonight. So when we migrate to a region, or we're forced to migrate to a region as our ancestresses and ancestors were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kesia, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. So we're forced to migrate to a region. We don't automatically, a large percentage of the people don't automatically indigenize themselves to the land. They're too busy trying to escape from the plantations and everything else. But even beyond that, if this was not a naturally occurring migration where we were drawn to get up and migrate to a different continent and so forth, drawn by the Abosom and so forth, if that was not the reason we migrated, we were forced to migrate and we found ourselves in this region, if we don't have that inclination to go towards immediately indigenizing ourselves because it's not necessary. We carry the same abosom in our blood circle that we had when we were still living on the continent, and that includes when we were forced to migrate. The Musuo Kesia, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. So some of our people were caught up in the 12,700s or 12,800s, so-called 1700s, 1800s, captured and forced on ships and ended up in the Western Hemisphere. So culture, as we practiced it at that moment, was time-stamped within our blood, fossilized within our bones and blood. So that culture is the culture we carried over. Whatever happened after that point on the continent, after we had left, whatever corruptions took place, we were not part of that. We fossilized the culture in its pure, pristine state hundreds of years ago as we were forced away, and we carried that pure, pristine culture into the Western Hemisphere. And that is the culture that has been passed down intergenerationally in our blood circle. The way we communicate with the Vodou, the Abosom, the Orisha, and so forth, and our ancestresses and ancestors in our blood circles, intergenerationally transcarnation. However we move and are forced to migrate to this region of the Earth Mother, we escape from plantations, free ourselves, establish our own independent nations, force the end of enslavement, waging war against the whites and our offspring, like the Gullah Wars and the wars against the whites and our offspring by Okunfo Yao, Nat Turner, and Okunfo Kwabena, Denmark Vesey, Nana Abena Araminta, Harriet Tubman, and so forth, waging war and forcing the end of enslavement. And then we began to try to develop ourselves, establishing black towns over 100 years ago, hundreds of black towns all around the country, reconstituting ourselves. But because we had a culture already, we didn't indigenize ourselves to the land. We simply continued our culture. However, because we are interfacing in this region of Asaase Afua, of the Earth Mother, culture that we brought with us takes on a different nuanced expression based on the way that we interface with the deities in our blood circle in this new region, new to us, of Asaase Afua. And so we have different expressions of culture based on our region, based on our locale. That becomes a locative identity. And therefore, for example, with Adebisa, divination, we may have previously utilized Nserewa or cowrie shells for divination in West Afuraka, Afuraitkait, but then we come over here and we don't have access to those Nserewa cowrie shells, so we use Nwora, seashells, and so forth to engage that process of oracular divination. Or we use possum bone divination in hoodoo, or these Nwora, these seashells in hoodoo for the same process. is slightly different based on the region of Asaase Afua, the earth mother that we are dwelling upon. It's a unique expression, but we're still connected to the same divinities, but that energy of the same divinities that we've been connected to for thousands of years, intergenerationally, transcarnationally, is now utilized through this new lens, through this new region that we find ourselves on, and therefore the expression is nuanced. And it takes up upon this different kind of character. And so we have a locative identity rooted in the location on Asaase Afua. And so we utilize this new oracular approach, and it's still just as effective as the previous approach because it is guided by the Nananoman Samako, guided by the Abosa, guided by our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, guided by the forces in nature, the dead. When we become possessed by the Abosa in this region, how we interface with the nature in this region. When we were living in Western, Central, and South Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit, and so forth, we didn't have to interact with nature in certain ways. There was no snow. There were no sub-freezing temperatures and so forth. And then the rain seasons were different. There were, in certain places, desert and so forth. We had to interface with the nature different. We had to interface with plant life and mineral life that didn't exist on the continent, or different species of plant life, different kinds of mineral life that didn't exist on the continent, as well as animal life that did not exist on the continent. New Achinibwa animal totems, animals from similar families or the same families and so forth, with different expressions incorporated within our ritual practice. They're carrying the same energy of the Abosom. They're part of that constellation of energy of specific Abosom. We incorporate them as part of our religious practice. So we're taking on now a locative identity, dealing with plant life, animal life, mineral life, and even as our ancestresses and ancestors are buried within this region of Asaase Afua, and they're interfacing with us as ancestresses and ancestors in this region, is colored and nuanced by this new expression, this new dynamic relationship we have in the West, including these warrior and warrioress ancestresses and ancestors, which we have a quote-unquote abundance of because of the condition we find ourselves in within this region of Asaase Afua. Plus, it's the Western region, it's the extreme west of Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit. So, of course, there's a different energy complex here as well, just by virtue of the fact that we're in the West. So we have a locative identity rooted in our interfacing with the deities, the forces in nature, in a unique expression in this region of Asaase Afua, and then also our interfacing with the Nananoman Samafo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors whose bodies are buried in this region of Asaase Afua, or the Earth Mother's body. So we have these different expressions, and that manifests as different expressions of ritual, different kinds of divination, different expressions of divination, innovations of divination, spirit possession, interfacing with Achinebwa animal totems, different kinds of medicine, the means by which we procure medicine and so forth, at different times of the day, different times of the night, different times of the year and so forth. These various different things are taking place. This is all part of our locative identity. It is an expression of our root identity, which is Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. But then there's a nuanced expression of that root identity, and it becomes our locative identity. Now, understanding that process, and we have gone through that process, and once we have forged that locative identity intergenerationally, passed on transcarnationally through our ancestral blood circles from the first ancestresses and ancestors who forged that harmonious way of living in this new region and transferred that to us. And we continue to transfer this knowledge, these ritual practices, these ways of living this culture intergenerationally and transcarnationally. No one outside of that blood circle can give you your identity. So traveling through the continent, they can't give you an identity. You have an identity by virtue of the fact that you're Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, just as they are. Because when you go back a few generations, your great-great-great-great-grandmothers are their great-great-great-grandmothers because you were living in the same village as them. Woman has 2 children. One of the children is forced into enslavement, and one stays on the continent. 5 or 6 generations later, the one who was forced into enslavement has a number of descendants in the Western Hemisphere. The one who remained on the continent has a number of descendants on the continent. But they all come from that same woman. And then they also come from that woman's grandparents and great-grandparents and so forth. So we go back a few generations, we have the same exact ancestors and ancestors as our people on the continent do. However, when we come forward, we not only have those same ancestors and ancestors that they do, but then we also have an additional group of ancestors and ancestors who were separated, forged their locative identity as a new expression of that ancient ancestral blood circle, and therefore a new expression of culture that does not exist on the continent in the same fashion. So you cannot leave your culture here, go to the continent, and have them teach you your culture and give you your identity when that's a locative identity that they have no knowledge of. You have a knowledge of their culture, their root identity, because you carry it in your blood circle. But in addition to that, you have that new expression. So they can't give you hoodoo. They can't give you juju. They cannot give you wanga. They cannot give you Greekery. They cannot give you the culture as it was forged here. They can't initiate an Akan person into the hoodoo tradition in North America. You can't go to Ghana or Ivory Coast and they initiate you as a hoodoo man or a hoodoo woman. Only someone here of your direct blood circle can initiate you into this expression of our locative identity that was forged by our people from ancestresses and ancestors who, when they left the continent, the way the culture was practiced at that time that was fossilized within them, in their bones, in their blood, was passed on to us. And then we took that fossilized culture and brought it into a new expression that never existed before right here in the Western Hemisphere. They can't teach you that on the continent. You can't travel there, study there, repatriate there, and they're going to give you an identity or give you a culture. They can teach you things about root culture that you already share. For example, being fluent in the speaking of our ancestral language. The one thing that we lost to a certain extent on the surface, of course, internally we do have that, but on the surface we may not be 100% fluent in speaking our language, but outside of that, we have spirit possession, AHONIM, and spirit communication, then you can't lose the culture, because the Abosom who fashioned the culture from the beginning are the ones who possess you and teach you the culture. The ancestresses and ancestors who forged and perpetuated the culture that was fashioned by the Abosom, they can possess you wherever you are and teach you the culture, and teach the community the culture by possessing someone and acting that culture out, showing people how to pick herbs, showing people how to procure medicine and so forth, showing people how to engage in ritual practice to protect themselves, heal themselves, wage war, and so forth. So as long as you have spirit possession and communication, you cannot lose culture. It's impossible unless you neglect those communications from the Abosom and Nsamako, the deities and ancestral spirit. So that's key. The only thing that we would have lost is a fluency in language, 100% fluent. We can learn that from when our Nsamako speak directly to us during possession, during dreams, through ritual practice. We can also supplement that with connecting with people on the continent. Outside of that kind of information on a root aspect of culture, they cannot give you your locative identity that was forged by our people here. They cannot give you your ancestral religious practice that was forged by our people here based on our identity and our interfacing with this region of Asaase Afua, and eventually consuming the food, the plant life, the mineral life, and some the animal life in this region as well as it affects our cells and so forth, and our energetic output as well. So this is what we're dealing with when we're talking about people travel. Now, some people will try to say, And, of course, we have pressed this when you look in our book, Etchi Sign, we go into detail about this and the purpose of this broadcast tonight. Some people will say, well, the only way you can really embrace Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit culture, African culture, you must travel to the continent. You must study on the continent. You must live on the continent, or maybe even repatriate to the continent. If you do not do that, then you can't say that you're practicing African culture. You can't even fully understand it. That is pure foolishness, absolute lie. We carry the culture in our blood circle, carry the deities in our blood circle who have been with us for thousands of years. Nyamewa, Nyamewa, Amen, assign a bosom deities to us pre-incarnation, before we even enter into the womb. They assign us to a specific ancestral blood circle before we enter into a womb. So therefore, when we come out of the womb, we are born with the culture wherever we are born into the world. And then when we live that culture out and interface with the region of the world of Asaase Afua that we are in, then we fashion that locative identity, which is based on our root identity as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, but given further nuance as we've shown. So traveling, as we said in the introduction, traveling through, studying within, repatriating to Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit does not confer ancestral knowledge upon the individual. Consider the individuals who have traveled to the continent. Some studied for years on the continent, living at shrines. Some people repatriate. Some people will believe, well, they must have real knowledge if they've done all of that, traveling or studying or even living there or repatriating. But forget about that. What about the people who were born and raised there and never lived anywhere else outside of the continent, who are still misinforming people about monotheism and saying our traditions are monotheistic, talking about Jesus, trying to incorporate Jesus within the Odu, Jesus within the Akan tradition, trying to incorporate Islam and all this other foolishness. If the people who actually live there and have never lived anywhere else, and their people, generation after generation, have been in those areas for over 1,000 years, if they can be corrupt, then what makes you think somebody who has simply traveled back and forth for a number of years, having study tours, or somebody who's traveled and spent a few months or even a few years living at a shrine, or even somebody who has repatriated to live at a shrine, why would they have more information to the people who've been born and raised there and been there for over 1,000 years unbroken? If the people who've been there for 1,000 years unbroken have become corrupt in their expression of culture, what is the traveler back and forth going to be talking about? They're leaving their expression of culture here, their locative identity, because they believe they do not have that. They believe they have absolutely nothing because they've listened to the whites and their offspring. They've listened to the whites and their offspring, make them believe that they're not Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, and therefore they don't have a culture. But when they get beyond that and say, well, we're all African, we're Pan-African, I don't know where I come from in Africa, so I claim it all of that kind of foolishness, they've once again re-embraced white culture, white identity. When you understand reincarnation, Debra, then there's no such thing as I don't know where I come from in Africa. You can communicate just like you can communicate with your mother and father and ask them what hospital you were born in. You can communicate with your ancestresses and ancestors who were alive when you were born and raised and lived on the continent, and you can ask them specifically, where was I living prior to this incarnation? And they can show you that clearly. And of course, you have an ancestral memory of that within your own Kra, your soul, your divine consciousness, that shows you that on a regular basis and directs you to people and artifacts and so forth that are part of that culture that they keep allowing you to come in contact with. They keep showing you for a specific reason. So you can keep bumping in, quote unquote, to your culture. So this notion of we don't know who we are, we claim it all, is a cop-out showing that you haven't embraced ancestral culture in reality. So, but when people get into that mindset and they think they're Pan-African and they go and say, well, if you're Pan-African, then you need to go to the continent, and that is the way that you understand the culture, and if you don't do that, if you don't make that pilgrimage, you can't learn. That's no different. The Negroes talking about they need to make a Hajj to Mecca. They need to go to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, or they need to figure out a way to get to Israel and all of this other nonsense. You have to go outside of yourself to understand your culture. Where do we get the idea that we must go outside of ourselves, and in this case, outside of our own direct ancestral blood circle, and even leaving the region we're living in geographically to go thousands of miles away so that we can get our culture, as if our ancestresses and ancestors have not been with us the entire time? Where do we get this idea that we must look outside of ourselves to restore ourselves? That is Christianity. That is the idiocy of Christianity. That is the Savior nonsense, the Messiah nonsense. This is Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all of this nonsense, as well as Hinduism, Buddhism, and everything else. But we're looking outside ourselves. People who think that they're Afrocentric, believe that they're Pan-African, believe that they're rooted in the Afrocentric worldview, which they really are not. People who've been pontificating about the Afrocentric worldview, or African-centered thought, or Pan-Africanism and so forth, and principles of Pan-Africanism, all these different things. They think they left the building, and in reality, they are still in that messianic nationalist mindset. They believe that they must follow the quote-unquote Jesus, whether they make the Babalawo or the Okomfo or the Hungan, the Jesus at that point. They must leave themselves, go outside of themselves to get their culture and come back, or have to go somewhere and then bring the culture back to the people. Or I went and I got the shrines and I brought them back, and now our people have culture. Because if I didn't go to the continent and get the shrine and bring them back to the people, then the people would have nothing. So what you're saying is Okumfo Yao and Okumfo Kwabena and Nana Abena Araminta and Nana Kwame Afrani and the various ancestors who made culture, maintained culture, waged war against the whites and offspring, transmitted and transferred Kudu and Juju and Vodou and Grigri and Gangan and Wanga and so forth intergenerationally for hundreds of years and sustained us. They had nothing, so you had to go and get something and bring it back, and then overlay it, and then denigrate your own ancestral locative identity and the culture that was born out of that locative identity. That is self-hatred. And then on top of that, people are so consumed with self-hatred that they would say, well, we're not even Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. The word Africa itself, they recoil from, because they've been conditioned to recoil from it. Not because they have any understanding, but the whites and offspring have beaten the word out of us from the time we were enslaved up until now. So they begin to embrace these silly, ridiculous doctrines, whether it's Moorishism, some iteration of that, some pseudo-indigenous Americanism, foolishness like that. African Americans ain't African. That stupidity, that foolishness is always rooted in self-hatred in every instance. No matter what people say, we're talking about what people are actually doing. It's always rooted in self-hatred. They don't know about the deity Afraid, also called Afuraka, male and female. Ra'et being called Afuraed or Afuraitkait, and Ra being called Afura. They don't know about that. They don't know about Afuraka, Afuraitkait. The whites and offspring didn't teach them that. The whites and offspring didn't teach them why the Afri or Afurika or Afuraik people in North Afuraka, Afuraitkait, when they migrated to North Afuraka, Afuraitkait, why they continue to utilize that name. Before the Romans invaded, before the Romans learned about them, they already had the name. Because the whites and offspring invaded the northern part of the continent and began to utilize that name for the northern part of the continent, that's what they're doing. They got the name from the people. Why did the people have the name? What did they say about the name? What did they say about the deities that they were being possessed by, and why they can't call their land mass, not just a region, the entire land mass, Afuraka, Afuraitkait, and they're the Afuraka or Afuraka people. When you understand the real cosmology, you can understand that. But the whites and offspring have poisoned the minds of some of our people to the point that they're so full of self-hatred that the word Afuraka, makes them cringe. That's a measure of their pathology. Then they seek to try to identify themselves in the Western Hemisphere and say, we came from the Western Hemisphere, or we came up out of the ground in the Western Hemisphere. Pure stupidity. So when we talk about identity and locative identity, we talked about spirituality, talked about our origins, how we migrated here, how we maintained the culture and so forth, how we interface with the regions of the Earth Mother, and forge that unique expression of identity. When we go back to our root identity, Afuraka, Afuraitkait, we talked about the cosmology, the origin of the term Afuraka, Afuraitkait. We talked about the cosmology of Amen and Amennet. Cosmology and the understanding of cosmology is rooted in direct experience with the Abosom, direct experience with Nyamewa and Nyame, Amenet, and Amen, the great mother, great father, the supreme being. So when you look at the cosmology as laid out in ancient Kemet through direct experience, we align with Amen and Amenet so we know exactly who they are, adults and children. We align with Ka and Kaet and experience their energy and are directed by their consciousness, and we know these two spirits who animate the black substance and their expansive and contractive quality. We deal directly with Hehu and Hehu, or Huhu and Huhua, as pronounced in Akan, these male and female forces in nature that expand and contract the black substance of space. We deal directly with Nun and Nunet, the primordial energy within the black substance of space. And Nun and Nunet who give birth to Ra and Ra, who explode out of the black substance to create the first fire and heat and light at the beginning of creation, who begin to spiral through the black substance, carving out black spheres. Those black spheres become the first black bodies, which become the first stars and so forth. And the energy of Ra and Ra penetrate those first black bodies to illuminate those black bodies, which become the first stars. And eventually our stars born in the same fashion, which gives birth to the planets, and so on. We've gone through that cosmology before. We did our 5-part series on the cosmologies and cosmogonies of ancient Kemet, the Septepi series, parts 1 through 5. But when we look at that, we're talking about direct experience with these divinities. Our notation and documentation of these cosmologies in ancient Kemet are a result of our direct experience. Then the whites and offspring come behind that, get that information, and then recast it in theory. So first, the whites and offspring believe that the black substance of space is just a void. It's just a nothing. And the only thing that exists are stars and planets and other material floating in the void of space. Then they learn, when they study our cosmology, because there's stuff with regard to the origin of the universe, they have to go back and study our cosmology. When they study our cosmology and learn about Nun and Nunet and Kai and Kaet and so forth, all of a sudden, with quantum mechanics and so forth, they come forward with the theories of dark matter and dark energy, talking about actually the black substance of space is really a substance, makes up over 99+% of the universe. And it's very important. It gives birth to the stars and everything else. That has always been part of our cosmology through direct experience, and then we documented that experience in these cosmologies in detail. So when you look at the theories of the development of the universe now through quantum mechanics and so forth, you will find that they follow the cosmology of ancient Kemet in detail with omissions that they do not understand. Of course, some of those omissions have to deal with the deities themselves, but if there are other omissions and details they do not have. But it follows along the line of the documentation that we already laid out thousands of years ago. So when we talk about our origins as far as the origin of the universe, we know exactly what we're talking about. When we go further talking about Afura and Afuraitkait, moving through the black substance of space and moving through the first black bodies and so forth, and fashioning or penetrating the original earth sphere and enlivening that sphere, causing the earthquakes on the ocean floor and causing the first landmass to surge up from the ocean floor to break through the surface of the water to become the first highland, the first Kayet on earth, and then Ra and Ra'ed moving through that Ka and Kayet to enliven that first landmass, becoming Afura and Afuraitkait, Ra and Ra'ed moving through the Afu, the match of the flesh. And so the Ka of Afura is the land Ka of Afura, the creator. The Ka'et of Afuraitkait is the land Ka'et of Afuraitkait, the creatress. So it's Afuraka, Afuraitkai, the land of the creator and creatress. That's direct experience with these dead. We know who Ra and Ra'ed are because we communicate directly with them. Adults communicate with them. Children communicate with them. Seeing them, communicating directly with them through possession and communication. So when we understand their movements and we can see them take shape and manifest radiantly through the rainbow and so forth, showing up at the shrine in that luminous form so people can see them at the shrine, we know these rainbow serpent divinity with that luminous power. We know exactly who they are. So when we notate and document them and their representation as the rainbow serpents, the circular rainbow around the sun, the circle with the dot in the middle as a representation of the sun and a representation of Ra and Ra'ed, who animate the sun and so forth. That circle with the dot in the middle, of course, as we show in our book, Yonkumpon and Yonkunton, Ra and Ra'ed, that the circle with the dot in the middle comes from the circular rainbow around the sun as a representation. We know who that rainbow serpent is because we deal directly with that deity through possession and communication. In ancient Kemet, we show that circle with the dot in the middle and the serpent surrounding the sun, the creator and creatress, operating through that animal totem, enlivening that force in creation. We show that circular serpent as Yonkumpon and Yonkunton in the Akan tradition, the rainbow serpent, male and female, operating through that animal totem, the creator and creatress, representing the collective ancestry of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. We show that same symbolism of the rainbow serpent, creator and creatress, collective ancestry of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in Vodun with Da and Idahueda. Show the same circular serpent, rainbow serpent as Odumare and Oshumare in the Yoruba tradition, the creator and creatress, rainbow serpent, creative power, collective ancestry of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. So we know exactly who we're dealing with when we call ourselves Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. Not only have we dealt with them experientially, but then we had documented that thousands of years ago and up to this moment within our language and within our cultural expression, cultural production, to show this rainbow serpent, male and female, today and also going back thousands of years. And then the whites in their offspring come forward, and then they simply repeat what we're talking about. The same thing takes place with our identity, even getting closer to the present. When we talk about what is our identity physiologically with regard to our ancestors, of course, we communicate directly with our ancestresses and ancestors, so we know exactly who they are. We have a direct experience. But then we can also look with regard to the documentation that we left on our own. Who is your mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, and so forth. We have their names, we have their images, we have their information and so forth that is passed down. But then we also begin to look to confirm these things biologically with regard to DNA and so forth. Just like the whites and their offspring learned about our cosmology and replicated that with regard to their theories of the origin of the universe because they learned it directly from our cosmology, but our cosmology is born of our direct experience with the deities. The same is true with our physiological identity. We are the first to understand our connection ancestrally. In the Akan tradition, Moja means blood, Huaba means the seminal fluid, the union of Moja and Huaba, the red blood and the quote-unquote white blood, when they unite, then we say the Moja and the Huaba unite to give birth to a child. It is the union of the red and the white imbalance that give birth to a child. Of course, the red and the white crown in ancient Kemet, when they're fused together, the white crown is a phallic symbol. Red crown is penetrated by the white, the union of the red and the white crown, as you see on the head of Heru, as well as the female divinity Mut and so forth. The union of the red and white gives birth to the child. We know the red blood and the white, quote-unquote, blood, those two rivers meet so that the ovum cell and the sperm cell within the two rivers can meet and fuse. In the Akan tradition, in the Moja, you have the Untong, the Metroclan deity, the Asaase Afua, the Metroclan divinity, that female divinity that has governed the spirit that's going to enter into the womb, into that zygote, have governed that spirit on the Metroclan side for thousands of years. That's the spiritual force animating the ovum cell and giving character and nuance to that ovum cell physiologically because of the spirit that animates that cell. The sperm cell is also animated by the Ejabosom, the Untoro or the Ejabosom, the Patriclan deity. So the energy that animates that swimming cell is a force in nature that has governed the spirit that will take up residence, the human spirit that will take up residence in that zygote, has governed that spirit for thousands of years in previous lifetimes. As part of the same clan thousands of years ago, now this spirit is coming into the womb, protected by this Patriclan divinity and Metroclan divinity. The red blood, the red river, and the white blood, the white river that unite. The sperm and ovum unite with this Metroclan divinity, the Asaase Afua, that animates the ovum cell, the Patriclan divinity, the Ejabosom, that animates the sperm cell. Those energies fuse as well to give character and nuance to the nature of this spirit that's going to be born in this new physical body. So just like we have physical DNA from the mother and the father's side, we also have that spiritual DNA from the deities that govern the Patriclan and Metroclan. That's always been the case. So we understand the physiological connection, the Moja and Huaba. We also understand the spiritual connection, the Asaase Afua and Ejabosom. We've documented that within the culture, talking about blood, talking about spirit, talking about these various different things, understanding the union of male and female and the cells that come together to give birth. And we show that pictorially as well. We show that in our Dinkra symbols, just like we showed it in ancient Kemet, in the Medusa and so forth, showing that union of the sperm cell with the ovum cell, the connection to Ra and Ra'et. So when you see that ovum cell and you see the nucleus within the ovum cell, and then you see the sperm cell swimming over and penetrating the cell and being fused with the cell, and you see that cobra swimming towards the quote-unquote disk of the sun and then wrapping itself around the disk of the sun, and that's a representation of Ra and Ra'et, the serpent circling the sun and so forth. You have the union of the sperm cell and the ovum cell, and that's why Ra and Ra'et are the creator and creatress, representing the collective ancestry of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. It's through them that we are born. We're showing that in the symbolism and in the cosmology, and we know exactly who birthed us because we can see spiritually. We can see just like with a microscope, just like someone can see an ancestral spirit walking around. Just like with a microscope, our people can see these sperm cells, ovum cells, and we replicate them in the iconography. There's a reason why we have that cobra wrapped around that circular disc with the dot in the middle. Not only the rainbow serpent as above, but also so below within the womb as the female has become impregnated. We documented it in the iconography. The White Nile Springs simply repeat what we have done. The same is true coming up to the present day. We can look within our biology, look within our blood, look within the DNA, and find out the markers that connect our people here in the Western Hemisphere to our people in West, Central, South, Afuraka, Afuraitkait. Once again, the White Nile Springs take the information. So we need to understand, where did that information come from? How was it built? What was it built upon? what is the foundation upon which it was built? We talked about that circular serpent, that wave serpent, that cobra serpent that will eventually wrap around the disk of the sun and so forth. When we look at DNA, the Whites and Offspring will talk about that and most important innovations, mapping the human genome and so forth. What is the foundation of that information? If you look up Dr. Herman Branson, Dr. Herman Branson was a physicist, Afurakani male in America, received his degrees and so forth in the 1930s, working in the 40s, doing a great deal of work in the late 40s and into the early 50s. He was asked to work on a specific project by Dr. Linus Pauling, which is a cracker, of course. They were trying to figure out the structure of protein, and they could not figure out the structure of protein, so they asked Dr. Herman Branson, the Afurakani man, to work on this. There were no, high-powered electron microscopes back at the time. They couldn't look into the structure of these cells. They didn't have a high-powered electron microscope so they could just look and see some DNA. They didn't have that in the 1930s and 1940s. So they had to figure it out. The Whites and Offspring could not figure it out. So they bring in Dr. Herman Branson, Afurakani man. He figures out the helical structure of protein. So the so-called alpha helix, he makes the calculations and figures out the calculations to show that helical structure of protein. And because of his work, later Watson and Crick, the American and British scientists who were working together, they were able, based on the work of Dr. Herman Branson, along with Corey and along with Linus Pauling and so forth, but it was Dr. Herman Branson's calculations to put forward the proper structure of the alpha helix. They were able to recognize that same helical structure in DNA. They proposed it on the work of Dr. Herman Branson, and then they put forward their theory about DNA, and it was later confirmed. When Dr. Herman Branson put forward the information regarding it and discovered and calculated and put forward the proper structure of the alpha helix, the person that he was working under, Linus Pauling, will later receive the Nobel Prize for Physics, and they snubbed Dr. Herman Branson, the black male, the Afurakani man. He didn't receive anything. Of course, this is what they always do. Decades later, before he made his transition, after the cracker made his transition and they were doing a biography, a couple of biographers were writing a biography of Dr. Linus Pauling and his great work and how he revolutionized science, and the greatest discovery in the entire previous century was the discovery of DNA that transformed science forever. They were writing his biography, and of course, Dr. Herman Branson sent them some information talking about how disgusted he was because he was snubbed and the work that he did was not recognized. They exaggerated the work of Linus Pauling and also of the other Dr. Corey, who was working along with Herman Branson, who Herman Branson was actually teaching, and so forth. Even though he was younger, he put forth that information just to let them know, I know that you're lying, everybody else knows that you're lying, and we're going to put this information out to expose the fact that you're lying. Linus Pauling received the Nobel Prize. Herman Branson received nothing. Now, of course, our people, we don't care anything about some Nobel Prize, about some crack. But the reality is, because of the work of Dr. Herman Branson, developing that structure for the alpha helix and proving what it was, that's the reason we have DNA research today. So once again, the Whites and their Offspring go to our people, learn what they need to learn. Of course, Dr. Herman Branson, you can never separate who he is as an Afurakani male. He's an Afurakani male, that means he's an Afurakani spirit who entered into the body as an Afurakani male. He's connected to Abosan. He's connected to Nananom Nsamanfo. When he's focusing on trying to figure out the structure of the alpha helix and trying to attune his adwini, his mind, to find out what the real structure is, there are no electron microscopes, so they have to calculate these structures to see what this helical structure really is and make it precise. He's attuning to his own spirit and the abosom who are governing him, whether he knew them directly or not. And the Nsamafo who are governing him give him this information, feed him this information so that he can understand this structure and put it forth, this model forth, and then verify it through his calculation. He's not just making up things and coming up with hypotheses and so forth. Afurakani people, Afuraitkaitnit people don't just come up with hypotheses. As soon as we begin to focus on a solution to an issue where there is some imbalance or lack of knowledge, our capacity to focus and attune to a specific issue to seek direct information to solve the problem is an invocation of Suhuti and Sesha, the male and female forces of divine wisdom, calculation and measurement and so forth, called Abde and Abderewa and Akan. It's an invocation to them, and they feed that information. His Nsamafo feed him that information, and then he gets the quote-unquote idea. And then once he gets that idea and recognizes that idea has value, or quote-unquote hunch, but really the information, then he works to calculate and verify this idea that came into him. And once he verified this idea, then he put it forward. And of course, the cracker got the information, recognized how revolutionary it was, later published the paper, and included his name, but reduced his role and made it appear that he didn't have much to do with it. The cracker gets the Nobel Prize, and then they rewrite the history and write Herman Branson virtually out of the history, outside of saying, oh, he was just part of the team as though he was a janitor or some nonsense like that. So, and they act as though it's a controversy. So when our people begin to study DNA structures today, we're going back to the 1930s and 40s when he was doing that work, and into the 50s, our people have been along the way every step of the way, going back to our own ancestral culture. When we look at these structures today from an Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit perspective, we can see the direct connection of our people in the Western Hemisphere to our people in West, Central, South Afuraka, Afuraitkait, and we destroy all of this self-hating foolishness about black people in America are not African. Pure stupidity. Smash that in various different ways. So, this is why we need to understand whether it's physiologically us having a specific identity or spiritually having a specific identity. This locative identity is what we're dealing with. This locative identity not only has to do with our physiology, but our expression of culture in the Western Hemisphere as we interface with Asaase Afua, the Earth Mother, in this region. Our culture develops. We pass that culture on intergenerationally, transcarnationally. It is just as valid and legitimate, of course, as any expression of culture on the continent. We have the root culture in our blood circle from the continent, and in addition to that, we have our unique expression here. And it's no different than somebody on the continent who may have lived in East Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnit, in the Sudan, ancient Kemet, and then they migrate to the western part of the continent. They develop the same culture they always had, but it takes on a different character. Now they have a different locative identity, just like the Akan migrated from ancient Kanat, Nubia, to the western part of the continent. They forge that locative identity as they migrate to the savanna and forest belt region, which is slightly different, but from the same root as the culture as it was expressed in ancient Kanat and Kemet. And then some of us are taken from those regions and forced into the Western Hemisphere, and we continue our root culture, but then there's a locative identity and a culture that's an expression of that locative identity, and our ancestral religious expressions, Hoodoo, Juju, Vodou, Grigri, Ingangan, Wanga, and so forth, are manifestations of that legitimate culture. No one can give us that culture. It is born of our blood circles, and it is pure, it is rooted, it is grounded, and it is as legitimate as any expression on the continent, past or present. So we want to go into the chat room. If you have any questions or comments, you can hit the number 1 on the phone line. If you have any questions or comments in the chat room, you must log in as a user in the chat room. And want to make sure it's nothing going on. And we just want to put the link in the chat room right now for individuals who may not be on the list, on the email list. And the email list, you can join our Afuraka Afuraitkaitnit Ning site, Afuraka-Afuraitkaitnit.ning.com, which is our own social media network outside of Facebook. So, of course, we're on Facebook as ODWIRA, but then we also have an Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and so forth, but then we also have our own separate social media network outside of Facebook that we pay for that's private, that only our people can join, because we need to have spaces where we can connect and study this kind of information and not be subject to being shut down, having groups shut down as they do on Facebook when you talk about accurate information, or pages shut down, or posts deleted, or having restrictions of being blocked and all this other nonsense. We must have something outside of Facebook as well. So our Afuraka-Afuraitkaitnit.ning.com site is a separate social media network where we deal with this kind of information. People post blogs. It's just very similar to Facebook, except it's our own private version. People post blogs, discussions, videos, images, all of that, groups, all these different things. So you can connect with us there, but if you're not on that list, we send out emails to that list when something is coming up, whether it's a show, a new publication, a new event, whatever's coming out, we post that and send an email out to everybody who's on the site so you will receive those. But for those who are not on that site yet, didn't receive the most recent emails, of course, over the past couple of days, we released the 6th presentation from our Etchi-Sign conference. Etchi-Sign Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference that we had here in Washington, D.C. on March 20th, the first day of Tepe Obere, the spring equinox. It was a great conference, well attended. We had 4 presenters in the building, and then we had 2 video submissions. All 6 of those presentations individually we have posted not only on our Etchi-Sign page, which the link is in the chat room, and of course it's on our ODWIRA.com website, but we also posted them on our YouTube page as well. So you'll see all 6 presentations there. Myself, of course, talking about Akanpo Nanasom, ancient authentic Akan ancestral religion, and Kudu and so forth. We had Rekik Kajara Nia Nevet Het talking about her Raseki Kemetic Reiki healing practice born of the blood circle of her Fang ancestry in Afuraka, Afuraitkait, but of course that locative identity in America, carrying that in her blood circle. We had Wabet Raven Seshat Sat Heru, who is the author of Wachet Yoga, Understanding Serpent Power, practice of Wachet Ankh, or Wachet Yoga coming from our ancestresses and ancestors. She talked about her divination practice with the palm leaf that was given to her by her Ovambo or Gullah ancestresses and ancestors here in America, which turned out, she would find out later, is the exact same divination practice of the Ovambo people of our ancestry in West and South Afuraka, Afuraitkait, and so forth. We had Sa Ara Sa Ankh Ab Sanut, who was dealing with the Juju tradition, the Yoruba tradition in North America, in association with not only his therapeutic practice, pro bono, mental health, therapeutic practices rooted in ancestral culture. So he's a therapist, but at the same time, he incorporates ancestral religious practice in his work and his pro bono work as well. Then, of course, we had Mama Mawusi Ashakir and Baba Montu Negasura Ashakir. They submitted a video presentation dealing with nation building, self-sufficiency, self-defense, which is a great presentation. And then we had Kalinda Laveau out of New Orleans, who's a Vodou queen dealing with ancestral Vodou, ancestral Louisiana Vodou as it was practiced by our people here in the Western Hemisphere prior to the Haitian migration into North America. Vodou was already here, brought by our people in their blood circle. So these 6 presentations you will find on the ODWIRA page on YouTube as well. Of course, we posted it on Facebook. It's also on our regular website. And then also you'll see on our main site, our social media network. Now, the other email that we sent out, we are planning to have an event, and we're going to post the event on the various sites and everything once we confirm the venue at the end of April, the last weekend in April in Washington, D.C., talking about the Akradin bosom. We are releasing our book, Akradin bosom, the deities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies which govern the 7-day week. Of course, Akan people derive our Akradin or our soul names from these divinities. So Kwesi and Akoswia, Esi, Ajua, Kojo, Kwabena, Abena, Kweku, Akua, Yao, Ya, Aba, Afua, Kofi, Kwame, Ama, Amemeniwa, these various names and their variations. These are Akradin or soul names because the deities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies are the same deities in our Khan culture as in ancient Kanad and Kemet, of course. Awusi, Ajua, Bena, Abena, Awuku, Akua, Yao, Ya, Aba, Afi, Ameme, Alsar, Alset, Herubefudet, Sekemet, Set, Nebethet, Heru, the son of Alsar and Alset, Wachet, Nekebet, Het Heru, and Amen men or men, the divinity men. These 11 divinities govern the 7 days of the week, the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies which govern the 7-day week. We derive our soul names from them. So this is the first book ever talking about the Akradin bosom in the Akan tradition and showing who they are in ancient Kemet and Kanat. As well, of course, these major divinities are divinities that govern creation, so they exist in every culture of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, of course. They simply have their own names and descriptive titles within the various languages, but these are the same forces that govern the Oria, the sun, the Osorane, the moon, the planet Awuku, which is so-called Mercury, the planet Benna, Abena, which is so-called Mars, the planet Yao, also called, quote-unquote, Jupiter, Ya and Abba, which are governing Uranus and Neptune. You have Afi, governing the so-called planets Venus, and the planet Amen Men, which is also called Saturn by the wife and her offspring. So these planetary bodies moving in cyclical movements affecting the earth and affecting our bodies, of course, as we live on earth, governing all natural cycles, that 7-day cycle, also including the chronobiological cycle, which is the 7-day cycle. Different changes happen within our bodies every 7 days in accordance with the movement of these 7 solar, lunar, and planetary powers, and also, of course, with the deities that animate. So this is the first book that we'll be dealing with that. We've done some broadcasts on them, a series on them, but we're going to have this information in the book, and we'll be giving away a free copy of that book to people who are able to physically attend the event in D.C. But we're also having a special. You can receive a pre-ordered copy of the book, and we're going to put a link. So we just put a link in our in the chat room. If you go to the publications page on our website for this special, if you'd like to pre-order the book, any order of 1 or more of our books, any of the 19 books we already have out right now, or any donation of $15 or more, will automatically give you that option to receive a copy of the Akradin Bosom book. So if you order any one of our books, include the Akradin Bosom book in your order. If you make a $15 donation or more, just because you sent the donation, we will send you 1 or more of our books, and we will include the new Akradin Bosom book in that package for you. So That's a special that we have going on. You can go to the website now, the odwirafo.com, the Nhoma page, the publications page on our website. And in the notation, whether it's the notation for if you send a donation in the comment section, you can mention that. The new book, you can just put new book in the donation section. Or if you order any order of one or more of our books, we will include that within your order. Automatically, we will include it within your order. You don't even have to put the notification down. Anybody who makes an order at this time frame, then we'll go ahead and include the new book, and it will be released. The actual physical copy we're going to be giving away at the event, but this is a pre-order, so you can do that now. So we're going to take a call on the phone line. Okay, Michio on the phone line, number 5808. You had a question or a comment?
Michio, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Michio, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm glad you. Just let me know if you can, because I have you on speakerphone. Well, first I want to thank you for posting the videos, the audio of the presentations from the Asaase conference for those of us who were not able to make it. And I listened to a couple of them, and some of the things that you just said within the last 10 minutes that I was listening, and some of the things that were said tonight bring to mind a question that I've been meaning to ask you, and that is, what is your insight, or what insight do you have into, our destiny here in North America? Because it seems like we are the ones who are reaching back, practicing Sankofa, reaching back to retrieve what has been lost. And, I hate to say it like this, but, I used to tell my former husband, who's Nigerian, I would say, I'm more African than you, because I, respected the tradition and wanted to know more about it, whereas, he dismissed it as, pagan or whatever the term they used to use if it wasn't Christian or Muslim. So, have you done any divination on this, or what insight do you have about our purpose and destiny, as we are situated here in North America? Why is it that it seems like, we here have more interest in, ancestral reversion than any other? And I might be wrong.
No, it's true. And the reason we actually did the document and a broadcast in relation to the document, it was built upon the Kukulkan, which we mentioned it near the end of the Kukulkan, but we did a specific document called Kamet and Kamet Orit, Alsar, Alset, and the restoration of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit culture in the West. So what we're talking about is, when you look at this cycle, when you look at Alsar, the great black one, Kam-Or, being thrown in a quote-unquote coffin, great black one, covered in a coffin, thrown in the river and so forth, and then the followers of Set find the coffin and open it up and carve his body up into a number of pieces and scatter him.
Mm-hmm.
Set escaped from the imprisonment of Set. She finds the body of Alsar. She reconnects him, bandages him up, of course, with the assistance of Tahuti and so forth. And eventually, the great black one is resurrected. They give birth to Heru. Heru becomes the revolutionary who rises up, wages war against Set, along with Heru Behudet and so forth, and restores balance. So when you see the great black one, Kam-Or, as a representative of that great black nation, literally, Kam-Or, who were thrown in a coffin or a casket, which are ships of enslavement, thrown into the water, carried to the other side. The casket is opened by the red ones, the purported followers of Set, even though they really don't follow Set, because Set does not deal with the whites and offspring, but they pretend as though they're following Set. Carve our body up and scatter our black body all over the South, as well as the Caribbean and South America and these various different places. The people who escaped from the imprisonment, the Maroons and so forth, escaped into the swamps. And they say they found the body of Alsar in the swamps, in the papyrus swamps and so forth. She reconnected with the great black body after reconnecting, remembering him, and so forth. They give birth to Heru in the swamps, in the papyrus swamps in northern Kemet, in North America, and so forth. Heru grows up to wage war against the followers, the purported followers of Set, destroys them along with Heru Behudet, exterminates them, and restores order. So that whole cycle is found in various populations of our people over thousands of years. This different cycle of death and resurrection. You find it in a microcosm as well as a macrocosmic way. So when we have conflict, this death and resurrection, succumbing to conflict to a certain extent, and then reconstituting ourselves and resurrecting to restore order. It happens within your body. You get, assaulted by cancerous cells or assaulted by bacteria. There's a quote-unquote death or a sickness or an illness, and you're laid out, but then the immune system cells come back to destroy those cancerous cells and resurrect you from that sick bed and so forth. So these different things are taking place, and quite naturally the people who lose, quote-unquote, on the surface culture, but then they reconstitute themselves right where they are, reconnect with Ra and Ra'et. Of course, when there's a portion of that story where Heru is stabbed by the scorpions of Set, and he dies, and the goddess Serket directs Aset to call on Ra, and Ra comes down, and then he sends Tahuti's divine wisdom down from the solar bark to come assist Aset with the resurrection of Heru, and then Heru is resurrected and eventually rose up to defeat Set and so forth. Right where we are, where we were killed and sent, slaughtered and sent and carved up and so forth, we reconstitute ourselves right where we are. We reconstitute the culture right where we are. We call on Ra and Ra'et right where we are. We wage war right where we are. We defeat and exterminate our enemies for good right where we are, and then we bring, that balance back to the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit world community. So we're naturally part of these processes, and we're fulfilling that natural cycle. As long as we adhere to the abosom that governs all natural events, we will come out on top. We can see what is taking place, how it's unfolding, and what the result will be as long as we live in harmony with the deities that govern all natural events.
Yeah, I read that. I remember that the article of the book Tom Orr, and what struck me in particular was this theme about cotton and being bound to cotton and picking cotton, and as it's relative to our unique experience here in North America.
Absolutely. And for people who haven't seen the document yet, it's on our website, Or, Asar, Aset, and the enslavement and restoration of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African in Amenti in the West. We show an image of Asar, the great black one, in the coffin. We show an image right next to that of the great black nation inside of a similar shaped coffin, which is an enslavement ship. We show the great black one, Asar, with the plants growing up out of his
right.
And then we also show the great black population of black people laid out on plantations, and they're preserved through cotton. On cotton plantations, the body of Asar was preserved, even though it was dead, quote unquote, but it was preserved and reconstituted with the cotton. It was able to survive. We survived on these cotton fields, this great black population wrapped up in cotton. We're bound in this cotton, but then we're still alive in this cotton. And then the Maroons who escape come back to resurrect us, free us from the plantations. We go back to the Maroon settlement, plan, plot, wage war, and destroy the entire so-called slave system. So that all takes place, it naturally unfolds from, our connection with the Abosa. So it's just it's not a manufactured symbolism. It's just reality. We are children of the Abosom, and so we're going to respond based on the energy that governs us.
Time for just another quick question about. I listened to a couple of your programs, archive programs, and all of them you seem to talk about this bird imagery in the appearance of birds. And they never were really prominent in any of my dreams or anything. In fact, mostly what I dream about are dogs. Dogs that feature very prominently in my dreams. But last weekend, I had an interesting occurrence where a bird got stuck in our fireplace, unfortunately. But, it was just flapping around in there, and I actually could see it through the glass. Just hopping around in the fireplace, and I've never experienced anything like that before. Although I know it's not rare. People who have fireplaces, that does happen sometimes. But it just so happened that it was that same weekend I was listening to a lot of your archive programs where you were talking about the appearance of birds. So I just wanted to ask you really quick if you could restate some of the important of the appearance. And it seemed to be a black bird with a yellow beak, but I couldn't really tell exactly what it was.
Now it's different because we mentioned some birds and different ones because we're talking about specific things. We're using examples, but it's not just birds. Of course, the various animals, they are totems. There are dogs sacred to different abosom, like dogs being sacred to Ogun and different clans. The Odwiraman, the dog, is sacred to the Odwiraman clan and in the AHONIM tradition and so forth. So there are different, and they all have their place. Now, of course, it depends on what kind of bird it was and what was going on at the time. Whether it was an ancestral communication, if somebody was, ancestral spirit sending something, if there was something going on within the family or within someone where there was some kind of blockage that was manifest through that, that event, and also showing what needs to be done or an alert with regard to what needs to be done, whether it's a blockage in arteries or a blockage in a relationship, what needs to be done to clear that blockage out or what could possibly happen if that, exigency isn't taken care of. So it just depends on what the nature of the sin was, whether the sin was coming from an ancestral spirit, coming from the abosom or what.
Well, I can tell you that particular weekend I changed up my ritual at my shrine and started to recite that Kemetic prayer after I came across it on your website, because before I was doing the prayer in English, and then I happened to come across the phonetic pronunciation and the audio that you provided, and I had been doing that like 3 days in a row, and then that's when that bird appeared. That's the only thing that preceded that particular appearance.
And then what was the cause for the switch in the ritual?
Because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether I was doing the right thing, and then I thought, well, maybe if I just, go back to the ancient Kemetic language, that would be a more appropriate, prayer, since it was, an authentic, original language of our ancestors, as opposed to, the English prayer to recite at the shrine. I didn't have any feeling either way, which would be more appropriate. So I thought, if anything, maybe I should do the, authentic language, the Kemetic language.
Oh, definitely. And in fact, we did a specific broadcast dealing with language and ritual prayer and so forth. So then you would look before what was taking place before that switch, what prompted you to move to that switch. If there were some blockages that you felt like things weren't coming through clearly and so forth, then you were prompted to make a switch. Once you made the switch, then this event takes place, whether it was a showing what's going to happen, what's actually taking place spiritually or, socially at some point. overcoming some specific obstacle. It could be a number of different things. So you can
right.
ask. You can ask
Mm-hmm.
once you assess those things. Ask if that interpretation is correct. Once you receive it, the meaning behind it, you can ask to see if that's correct. And then once you get that information, then you can see how it plays out to see it confirmed in your life.
Right.
To see if that interpretation that you received, that you felt like you got confirmed spiritually, if it actually happened physically, so you can get that full physical confirmation.
Mhm. Okay. Well, yeah, I just thought it was interesting that I had been listening to a couple of your past broadcasts where you happened to mention, the appearance of birds. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Well, the fact that they, on one hand would direct you to listen to those specific broadcasts that were dealing with these avian animal totems, and once you get that into your spirit, then they put you in a position where one of them actually shows up, showing you that there's a connection and there's a communication that is happening, whether you thought maybe they weren't hearing or, communicating or answering what you were trying to learn. Those are one of the ways that they synchronize events to make sure that you know that they're paying attention and they're working on whatever you're asking about.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your answering both of my questions.
May I say we appreciate the call.
May I say.
Okay. So, all right. So we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat room. Okay. So it's 11:14. So we can end it right here. We will be back on tomorrow for Egua Marketplace. But, okay, there's a question in the chat room. What's a simple prayer one can utilize when they cannot the original Kemet or Akan dialect? So I'm going to put a link in the chat room right here. So if you just Google this in a search window, sample Apai prayer from Kemet and Akan, you'll see that link on our webpage. Just Google that. What we did was we composed a simple prayer in the language of ancient Kemet. So we have the prayer in the language, and we also have, of course, the English translation. Then we also have a link to an audio version that you can click on the link and hear it. It's a basic prayer that any one of our people, of course, our people only can use, and you can utilize that. And it's simply composed from the language of ancient Kemet with the definition and some background information as well. And that's the reason we put that out is because, as the previous caller mentioned, if you're not, number one, if you don't know a specific language, but even first, if you don't know who you are, what your ancestral clan is, as a spirit entering into the womb of your mother, of course, before you got into the womb, you were a spirit. You were an ancestor or an ancestress who had lived in the previous lifetime. You were part of a clan, part of a group, and so forth. Now you're drawn into the womb of your mother. You're born in America, born, in a region where culture is not being taught, more than likely. So you grow up not knowing what clan you're from. Now before you got into the womb, you knew exactly who you were. You were an Akan spirit, you were Akan. If you were Yoruba, you were Yoruba. You knew exactly who you were. You got sucked into the womb. You lost some of that information on the surface, but you have an ancestral memory, and it's just in your spirit. But if you don't know right away, then you can utilize the language of ancient Kemet and Kanat, because that's the parent language going back over 40,000+ years, the various languages on the continent. So you can utilize that language, and your ancestresses and ancestors of ancient Kemet and Kanat, your Aku, the spiritually cultivated ones, will not only, of course, connect with you, but it's part of their responsibility to direct you as to what clan you actually come from. So you can utilize that prayer. So just Google that. In fact, I'll put the off of the direct link. You can find it on the odwirafo.com page. I'll put a link in here right quick. The direct link to the actual PDF for that. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'll just put the link in the chat room. So it's a sample apai, sample prayer, inkamet, utilizing the tree language for vocalization. And so we have one more call on the phone line. For the people who can't stay on for the rest of the call, again, we're having that special, if you go to our publications page, Homa page, publications page, where all of the 19 books are. You see the 19 books, the ebook versions are free downloads. You can download all of them at any time. The softcover versions of our books range between $8 and $11. You can order those. Any order of 10 books or more is automatically 30% off. For example, the first 10 books are $66. We also have a 20% off for the first 5 books, foundational books. First 5, $40 for the first 5 book set. But any order of 1 book or more, $15 or more, we will include the new Afuradim Bosom book in your order. Or if you make a donation of $15 or more, we will send you a copy of the new Afuradim Bosom book as soon as it comes off the press and so forth. So you can do that. We're having that special now. You can go directly to the Homa page and just make a regular purchase. We'll just automatically include it, or a donation will automatically include it. You don't have to make any extra notations. You can add a comment if you want to, but you don't have to add any extra notations. Anybody who makes a purchase or a donation will just automatically add that in there for you. And that allows us to, continue to give away the free books that we do and have the free events. So Asaase, we appreciate that support. Okay, on the phone line, Michiawo number 4737. You had a question or a comment?
Michiawo, Madasi for a very informative show this evening. This is Sister Kentake Nalopenza calling from Toronto.
Major, what's up?
Yes, Major Cho. I wanted to just comment and ask a question in regards to the brother you spoke about earlier, the African brother from the diaspora. Do you need the correct spelling of his name?
Oh, okay. Dr. Herman Branson. Branson is Branson.
Herman Branson, okay.
Right.
And this information is accessible on Google or whatever?
Yes, you can Google a number of different places on Google. Of course, very, very often they kind of, gloss over the controversy, or they'll mention it briefly, or they just turn it over to Linus Pauling and say there really was no controversy and he was the one who did everything. But you find some sites that will show that it was Herman Branson it was his calculations that showed the helical structure of the alpha helix, and from that, Watson and Crick, built that helical structure of DNA. So he was the foundation for that.
Okay, Madasi for that information. I also wanted to announce briefly that for the listening audience out there, wherever you are in the world, for Africans who are located in the city of Toronto or the Ontario region, we are going to be starting a Odwiraman study group this Saturday. If you are interested in participating, you can contact me at akomatours@gmail.com. It is totally unapologetically African Fakui that we are starting. It's going to be taking place for the moment in my home, and we're open to approximately 7 to 9 people. At this moment, we're at 5, so we can still add on about 4 more people for the moment. And it's a potluck dinner as well, so the dinner is also served. And we would just appreciate the community coming together because there's a lot of Urugu madness going on in Toronto, and we want to come together in the true spirit of Asaase to continue the work of our Honorable Egungun and Gananut Misamafo, because there's a serious war going on in Toronto on several levels, and we need to address it by really reintegrating ourselves into our ancient ancestral culture. So that will be starting this Saturday and continuing. It's a continuous thing. We're not taking any breaks. It's a consecutive Saturday, every Saturday of the month. And we'll be stopping approximately October when the weather gets kind of crazy again, and commencing, when the weather, we're through the winter season. Through the winter season, we'll be doing Skype if people cannot have access, to traveling for, due to weather conditions or whatever the case may be. But at the moment, we're very serious about this, and this is a consistent study group that's going to be continuing throughout the year. Asante sana.
So the email address again is akoma@gmail.com.
Akoma, right. I'll spell that out. That's AKOMA, Akoma, Tours, with one word, AKOMA, Tours, TOURS, @gmail.com. And for those people within the region of Toronto who are French-speaking, I am French-speaking. I'm also French-speaking. I grew up in Quebec, so you're more than welcome as well.
Okay, Medase, we appreciate that. And I know some people there who are looking for some connection in Toronto to get some real information. So, Medase, we appreciate that.
Yes,
okay, so again, that's and what Sister Kentake was talking about is a fake coup. So fake coup is a term for a group or association in the Akan language. So people have independently established Nanasom fake coup ancestral religion study groups, and they're studying this information in our publications as well as other things, but primarily what we're publishing in a systematic fashion, crafting their own, approach to studying the publications and so forth. We do have a curriculum with regard to the order within the way the books are published. So Kukutuntum is first, and Ubin Shang is second, and so forth. But people, they have their own independent groups. So there's a group in Philly, there's a group in South Jersey. They're establishing the Nanasom Feku in Toronto, as Sister Kentake just said. There are people in California. So people are, coming together and studying this information on a periodic basis. Some people once a week, some people every other week, some people once a month. It just depends on what people decide. And it's their own independent group. They're not up under, our administration. This is independent, just people who appreciate the information, want to incorporate ancestral religion into their lives and so forth, adults as well as children. So you can start a Feku yourself. We have a Feku page, the Nanasom Feku page, Ancestral Religion Study Group page. You can start a Feku, a study group with one or more people, whether it's in person or online. If you decide to start a study group and just start going over the information with one or more people, when you go to the Feku page, what you will see is the list of our books and publications in order, starting with the Bukutuntum. You'll also see that you can purchase those books at a discount since you're part of a Feku study group, and the discount is 30%. So, for example, the Bukutuntum is $10. You would get that for $7 as part of the Feku. And you'll see that right on the page. You can make those purchases right on the page. So if you want to form a Feku, you can do that immediately. You don't have to, you don't have to get authorization from us to do so, because this is your own independent thing. But if you do so, then you automatically receive, you can purchase any of our books for 30% off, and that is already in the price on the Feku page. On the regular publications page, it's the regular price. On the Feku page, the pull-down menus for the books and so forth are at 30% off discount price. So if you have any questions or comments, of course, you can hit us up on our regular email address on the website, odwirafo.com. You can connect with us, of course, on Facebook as well. Kwesi Akan on Facebook as well as Odwirafo on Facebook. You can also connect with us on our Ning site, Afuraka-Afuraitkaitnit.ning.com. So, again, Yerase, we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast, and Yebeshiabio, we will meet again. What's up?